Thank you very much for the kind invitation to give me the opportunity to come and present some ideas and concepts and experiences which we have in terms of making the connection between ecosystem degradation through water and human health implications. You're going to find, first of all, you're going to find that the topic, the title, has been humanized. I provided Catherine with a humongous title that it just about was said about everything in the title, and it has been very carefully crafted and humanized, and so that this is a lesson for me as to how to synthesize things and bringing them to in communication science, put it that way. So yes, measuring the degradation of ecosystem health caused by climate change. You are going to find that the title slightly builds expectations, and I hope the content of the talk will be able to respond to those expectations. Every time you talk about climate change as one of the contemporary major, I would say, survival issues of our time, not only environmental issues of our time, brings with it as a host of collateral issues that need to be dealt with. And there's all the human dimensions to climate change, and if you will, the economic dimensions too, and the developmental dimensions too of climate change. In this talk, I will, unfortunately, I don't have that range of expertise to be able to communicate solidly some information in those, particularly the latter aspects. And I will be talking essentially about the biophysical aspects of how climate change causes ecosystem degradation. Every time you talk about climate change too, you have to concern yourself with climate change impacts immediately has embedded within it the need for a baseline. So where is the baseline you start with in order to be able to measure or assess whether the departure from the baseline means either way improvement or degradation or negative change means some real impact due to climate change variables. There are all these kinds of prognosis. We are in 2012. Have you got your survival kit yet? Because according to the Mayans, the world would come to an end on 2012. Some people say that it's not that the world would come to an end, it's because the guy who was doing the glyphs run out of the rock, and they run out of the rock in 2012, and that was it. Now, okay, without further ado then, my talk will essentially concentrate on trying to make the connection between a host of environmental variables that we can actually measure at different scales, from very broad to very narrow, or if you will, from very general to very particular, or from small to broad to large scale, and how those assessments or measurements of those variables can be related to ecosystem decline or ecosystem health. And the issue that I can talk about, and perhaps is of interest to some people in the audience, could be how do we make the connection between ecosystem health and human health. And that, I'm afraid, that's a step that we haven't gone, this is work in progress, we haven't gone to that other third step, making that connection. Hopefully, through seeing the light again, not only in terms of soccer, but seeing the light in terms of methodologies and approaches that would allow us to link that ecosystem degradation to human health issues. And then I'm very glad to be here in terms of being able to leverage the knowledge of this at the UNU and in the INWEH, and see if there's some room for collaboration along those lines. Without further ado then, So the components of my talk, I would look at, from a very broad perspective, at a remote sensing approach to monitoring watershed ecosystem health and degradation at source. And then the effects of change on indicators of watershed primary productivity on ecosystem health and water quality. And then be able to address the impacts of climate change on projected watershed primary productivity, and hopefully derive a methodological pathway which may be helpful in monitoring historic trends, past that is past condition, present condition, and hopefully future projected changes. It's a very ambitious talk, and I hope I'll be able to do it within the 20 minutes that I got allotted to. But if I start rambling, just throw something at me, and I'll then know that that's my sign that I've run out my time. So what are the main concepts that brings us to our presentation? We're going to be looking at the environment from a very broad perspective, from the perspective of what you can see in a satellite image, the ecosystems from there. So the importance of remotely sensed variables that can be used as proxies for ecosystem health and hopefully water quality. So we attempt to make that connection between them. The reason for that is that we have an increased, with several initiatives, amongst them the Clinton initiative to release vast amounts of remotely sensed data. It is my belief that it hasn't been leveraged sufficiently enough in order for us to derive monitoring programs that would make the connection between ecosystem health assessment at the very broad scale and parameters of ecosystem decline or water quality at the larger scale or very particular area. So that increased access to multi-scale and multi-temporal and multi-spectral, multi-everything remote sense data that gives us an important point in that we can use or leverage that information to reduce monitoring costs while maintaining or even perhaps increasing accuracy of monitoring by increasing the extent of coverage of the area that can be monitored. And also give us an opportunity for investigating and possibly in finding and revealing unsuspected functional relationships that may occur between different ecosystem compartments on the landscape at those multiple scales, from very broad, again, from global, national, regional, and even local. And I would present some examples from here from Ontario, and then I'll make the jump on the international scene and present some examples, particularly as far as climate change from Ethiopia. This is work that has been work in progress that a PhD student of mine has just completed. He's Ethiopian himself. He was a product of the Ethiopian famine that hit our television screens in the '86. So he was one of the ones that survived that famine, and hence the motivation for studying the impacts of climate change on primary productivity in his country. So the relationship, I will attempt to establish the relationships between remote sensing variables, and I'm going to try a number of acronyms at you, and I hope I will attempt to demystify them. So NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, NPP, Net Primary Productivity, GPP, Gross Primary Productivity of Ecosystems, and the photosynthetic net productivity, and other parameters that are useful that we actually, within the broader scale, we calculate. And we can see during time series how changes occur over the landscape and how those changes could be helped in finding explanatory variables of some water quality issues, water quantity and quality issues at the level of watershed. So we're working here at a very broad level as opposed to on very specific lake or a very specific stream. Then I will present some case studies that focus on watersheds in South Central Ontario and in Africa, as mentioned, at multiple scales. So we have some working hypotheses. One of it is that net primary productivity of ecosystems is strongly related to ecosystem services. That more than a hypothesis, a corollary, because it is known that the net primary productivity of an ecosystem definitely is a very high and strong correlation with ecosystem services. And hopefully then to water quality parameters, particularly water quality at source, headwaters. And some of those ecosystem services, we're talking about increased moisture retention, for instance, filtration, which is important for water quality. It's also related to runoff and sediment and chemical transport, and suspended solids, turbidity, and all other parameters of water chemistry that are related directly with the net primary productivity. So hopefully then, if by finding out trends and patterns, spatial and temporal patterns of net primary productivity in the watershed, we would be able to relate those to those ecosystem services that are pointing out here, and to which one of them, some of them may be more strongly related than others. We also have as a working hypothesis that changes in net primary productivity over time, usually those changes are associated with land cover or land use changes or ecosystem decline, may serve as indicators of water quality, and therefore these parameters can be used as covariables in monitoring programs when we need to, in other words, these parameters could be cheap to measure parameters that could be used as opposed to expensive to measure if we find a good correlation between them, both temporally and spatially, in order to be able to use those cheap to measure parameters for monitoring programs. Again, this is at the regional and watershed scales. So having established then that the working hypothesis is all related to net primary productivity, then there is an important fact here to mention, that it's a wide array then of sensors and platforms collecting all these kinds of data at multiple scales, and those sensors and platforms could give us a range of spatial and temporal and spectral and even radiometric resolutions that we can use to monitor changes in net primary productivity at very broad scale and at very particular scale. I present some examples further on in the development of the talk. So this essentially, the wider range of sensors and platforms produce a vast array of data which now can be leveraged because it's been released. A few years back, say 5-10 years back, those data could cost significant amounts of money, and a satellite image would cost something in the order of $600 to $700 per image. With the release of all this data and all the number of programs that are available now for Earth observation systems, those data have become available for download. As to why more people don't make use of those data in an attempt to relate this in monitoring programs is something that is still puzzles me, and because I have looking at the literature, you don't see too many links that are made between water quality and monitoring of it and quantity with the use of this type of information in order to leverage its availability. Now, as I mentioned, the release of those multi-platform and all these kinds of data then brings in itself the need for a methodological framework. How do we put all those data together, that information together? How do we develop a sequence of steps that could provide a framework within which people would actually use those data for monitoring purposes, for developing monitoring programs that minimize cost and that could be within reach of agencies and conservation authorities. Just to give you an example, there is of geospatial and Earth observation science networks. There is the Global Terrestrial Observing System, GTOs, and you can download all kinds of information on parameters from different ecosystems and observations, measurements that they have themselves that you can actually download for any given area of interest. This GTOs is a collaborative effort between several UN agencies here, among them FAO and UNEP and World Meteorological Organization, UNESCO, etc. So all of them, these efforts can be leveraged again and have been put together to produce those data that now are available for public download and monitoring. As with the turning of the millennium, we saw the launching of the Terra and UNU-INWEH satellites, and they are producing a bi-weekly picture of the entire planet that is giving us, in the moderate spectral resolution program, is giving us values such as net primary productivity. That can be, you can have a picture of the entire planet every 2 weeks, and you can look at how your net primary productivity is moving across time, and whether there are any stresses of those watersheds, of those ecosystems that could be accounted for, and attempt to relate those to some observed variables of that relate to water quantity and quality at the watershed level. So there is a link that needs to be made between this vast array of data that is being produced and other parameters that we need. In other words, this type of information could be helped in backing up some suspected relationships or causality relationships that may exist between net primary productivity, ecosystem services, and the water quality and quantity. Just a number of links, where you can find those data. Land submissions, the MODIS, particularly MODIS program, the Terra and UNU-INWEH satellites. Again, you have bi-weekly picture of the entire planet, entire gigabytes of data that are available you can actually cut and clip and get information from your area or a given watershed that you may be of interest. There is all global land cover facility and GIMS programs from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the ABHRR, very high resolution radiometer that gives data, provides satellite images that you can actually look in and download. There are also commercial available information, some of which is legacy data that could be also obtained by request, particularly if it's not too recent. And then a very high resolution, you have platforms such as QuickBird that you can get 1 meter, sub-meter resolution of information to be able to monitor at much larger scales. So all of these platforms and sensors are available. So this is a picture that illustrates the moderate resolution spectral radiometer sensor, or MODIS, mounted on the Terra satellite, and this is one of the pictures that are produced. You have here the mean net primary productivity from 2000 and 2006, averaged over the run of the 6 years, in grams of carbon per square meter per year. You could have this picture every 2 weeks, and if you are interested in a certain area in the planet, so you're working in North Africa or North America or anywhere in South America, you can have a clip of that and then look at time series analysis and see how your ecosystem, in terms of net primary productivity, is declining or getting healthier. I'm not going to go into the details of it, and this is just to impress the audience that we do something very logically. So we take information from the GIMS 8-kilometer resolution, calculate normalized difference vegetation indices of whatever run of time. In this case, it was for 22 years. This is the example of Ethiopia. And we got information from the MODIS for the most recent values from 2000 to 2003. And eventually these are already computed net primary productivity, and we make them with the NDVI. With the job here is to convert normalized different vegetation index, which essentially is a ratio of infrared minus red. This NDVI, and I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence by explaining it, but I feel like I should. NDVI is essentially a ratio of red minus infrared over red plus infrared, which is giving you is essentially photosynthetic activity, chlorophylltic and photosynthetic activity that can be detected at a 1 kilometer resolution, and then can be obviously linked up to net primary productivity using some of the approaches and relationships that eventually gives you net primary productivity for the entire image of the entire area. This is an example, a little example that we calculated not long ago with for Ontario. We downloaded data from, just to illustrate, we downloaded data from in the regional context, downloaded data. It comes in a sinusoidal 1 kilometer resolution of gross primary productivity. And for this date, this particular date, and then using algorithms that are available also from NASA, we were able to transform this sinusoidal projection into orthogonal projection, so we have already an image. And you have values of gross primary productivity. That is primary productivity without the respiration, without taking away the respiration values. And that's simply calculated from a conversion efficiency factor and the absorbed active radiation from the satellite and multiplied by this conversion factor, and that would give us a gross primary productivity. So this product is available for any given area. You can actually clip it to any given area, in particular any given watershed, and obtain that information on a time series sequence. A little bit more into estimate of daily gross primary productivity. This is for 8-day period and at 1 kilometer resolution. And again, you get that calculation already made for you. And the display essentially brings immediately some features that you can begin to challenge or suspect of carrying more research on these areas, for instance, of extreme values. What does it mean? There are negative areas here on the riparian or vegetation around the lakes and water bodies, and then these other values are very high. So this would demand investigation. What's happening here that is so contrasting within these spatial dimensions? And this is a run that an little exercise we did in the Kawartha Lakes area, calculating net primary productivity. These are grams of carbon per square meter per year, average of the run, 2000 to 2006. So you have the 2000 values here, and you may notice that there are some changes, and that the red, particularly from 2000 to 2006, the red values are essentially declined. There are very low values in net primary productivity, whereas the green values are more significant, twice as large as the red. So you see a little bit more of the red is spreading, particularly in these areas. You see a little bit more of the red spreading. So what does that mean in terms of water quality? We don't know. That's what we need to investigate. But these data are available. We can just run the algorithm and look at the trend, and finally then try to see whether there are any net changes, which this image is portraying. The net changes, and you find when you actually graph them, then the change, there are more negatives than there are positives. So that means that in this area there is some ecosystem decline. What is causing that ecosystem decline? This is a matter of investigation, particularly in a given watershed, and what that decline means in terms of water quality and quantity in our river streams and water bodies. So this is of concern, the fact that in all of these areas, maybe the impact of urbanization, cottages, build-up, deforestation, something is going on that it is creating this from 2000 to 2006. Now, we haven't been able to find the time to project it to 2012, but if the relationship is linear, then we would expect this curve to dip even further in terms of negative productivity. So that is at the very coarse level. If we want to take a closer look at the larger scale, then we could use, again, that was a 1 kilometer resolution. We could use high resolution multispectral data, and again, without actually getting hung up on the details of this, you can download now with the Clinton Initiative. There's a bundle of Landsat data that can be downloaded, and you can do similar NDVI conversion to net primary productivity. NDVI essentially is a parameter that can be calculated from red minus infrared over red plus infrared. And then related, oops, I think I went back, related to with any of the approaches to conversion, then convert it to net primary productivity, and then you can run the time series in that way. This is another example now using Landsat instead of the MODIS. And using Landsat, and we concentrated on this Kawartha Lakes, this area of the Kawartha Lakes that is here enlarged. And we run from 1993 to 2002. And you see net primary productivity computed as a function of this index, NDVI, and the photosynthetic active radiation value that is also remotely sensed. You can see now, hopefully you can appreciate that the areas in yellow and orange have increased from 1993 to 2002. Now, how does that reflect in terms of the quality and some parameters of water quality in these lakes? We don't know, and that's what we are investigating or attempting to investigate. But definitely you can see that there is a valid question that to be made. A brief attempt to relate those values finds out that in the report card that we get from conservation authorities tells us, in terms of water quality, tells us that we can relate forest cover to a point scores that tells us what is the health of the grade, whether the watershed should pass or not in terms of the grade that it's getting. So we see here is that forest cover in percent has a very high, greater than 25%, has a very high score in terms of report card, and that translates in ecosystem health. And then the forest interior in percent also has a very high grade in terms of the report card. Very low values of both forest interior and forest cover gives us very low values in the report card, and even a failure, possible failure value. What I'm trying to establish here is that there's a nexus to be made between things that can be monitored from a satellite in terms of forest cover and forest interior, and the actual grade that you get in the report card of a given watershed. This is an example, a real example, real values from Pigeon Lake in the Kawarthas related to multispectral satellite detected variables. And we see here that the actual forest cover values changes, and then you have the actual total for the watershed, and this is related to a real value given in terms of the scorecard. So this is a very healthy watershed, and then the breakdown of other sub-watersheds for the Pigeon Lake and then the totals, and then you see again that there's it's still not very much impacted by those two variables, forest interior and forest cover. And that you see that the report is in the A's and B's for these different components or sub-watersheds within that watershed. So this is essentially what an attempt to establish relationships between a way of parameterizing some results or some indices that would tell you something about the health of ecosystems as a function of these two variables that relate to forest cover. Now, there are already monitoring networks for standards that set off water quality indicators, and some of the most common chloride, nutrients, suspended solids, etc. So these are standard variables that are part of the monitoring programs. Each one of those dots are part of the provincial stream water quality monitoring network. And this is values that are, as to in 2005, you have all these monitoring sites. So it is possible or conceivable that those monitoring sites could be related to, possibly related to covariables or proxies that is strongly correlated, especially and temporally, with water quality indicators, or something that we can see actually from the satellite. So, questions, fundamental questions that are essentially something that occupies us at present. You have here the net primary productivity deficit. And this is the image of changes that we saw, that the net primary productivity decline. Are these values related? How do we relate these values to whatever parameters we're getting in these monitoring networks, or in terms of these parameters, changes in chloride, nutrients, suspended solids, trace metals, and all the water quality parameters? How do we relate them quantitatively? Does a quantitative relationship or functional relationship or causality relationship exist between these parameters and the parameters that we can see here of ecosystem decline, such as negative changes in net primary productivity or gross primary productivity? So this we don't have the answers yet. We know that something is happening, and we are in the process of collecting a fairly large data set for these lakes of water quality, getting all those data, and see if we can come up with some functional relationships that help explain or establish some causality. In a very primordial stage, we run some paired biomass and band ratio data set. In other words, we're attempting to link observations from the satellite and to one water quality parameter, and that is total phosphorus in the water. So we have observations that we can actually, with a GPS, locate, and we have the actual results of analysis. And at the same location, we have the pixel that give us the NDVI, or the green vegetation index, or the bidirectional reflectance index. And the question is there any relationship between phosphorus in the water and these vegetation indices that can be measured in the lake? And the answer, yes, there is a correlation. We were able to find coefficient of determination of 0.825, which is fairly decent given the preliminary nature of these results, between the actual green vegetation index, this one here, and which is this band ratio, this is the green vegetation index, and the total phosphorus concentration. Therefore, we can leverage this relationship and then attempt to map out total phosphorus concentration as a function of this green vegetation index. Not only that, but we could actually attempt to relate the green vegetation index, or the phosphorus calculated from the green vegetation index, to chlorophyll A content, which is essentially a proxy for algal communities and algal development in the water bodies. And here is a resulting map that tells us something is going on in these areas. in these areas in blue that relates to eutrophication. Excess of phosphorus and then possible eutrophication, chlorophyll A and possible eutrophication as again given by the chlorophyll A map values. So this is an example again how we can link observations from remotely sensed observations to actual water quality parameters, leveraging the possibility of even mapping out the spatial distribution of them. And now, okay, this is baseline. I brought you from the very general perspective to the very local of a lake, and now we get you back again into the satellite from looking at a very small scale at the country and a specific level. And this is again looking at the effects of climate change on land degradation. What I talked to you about earlier on is essentially baseline data. This is working with historic data. Now, how do we then can go forward and be able to make some predictions as to what are the impacts of climate change will be in net primary productivity of ecosystems or some other parameters of health of ecosystems. And for that, we need to essentially rely on data of general circulation models. We don't have the capacity, most researchers, only a few research centers have the capacity to run general circulation models because they are fairly large. You require a supercomputer to run them. They are very complex. But what you have access to is to the, in the IPCC, data, there's a data an information service where you can actually go and download the runs, the results of the runs, at the different time that you are interested in. And what we've done here is that we don't have a supercomputer at Trent. If we had, then Trent would cease to be Trent, it would be something else. And so therefore our studies rely on gathering information again from the IPCC data and sharing service. So what we've done here is essentially attempting to establish at the national, subnational, and local level a paradigm or a methodology that would help. This is work done for the FAO, by the way, for the LADA project, Land Degradation Assessment in Drylands, and is now in process for publication by the FAO. So one of the main problems that you find when you work with climate change is that the estimates of climate change and future variables essentially come at a resolution of half-arc degree. That means you have a pixel of 54 by 54 kilometers. And then they say within this 54, temperature is going to increase of 2 degrees or whatever number of degrees, and rainfall is going to change in this way, evapotranspiration is going to change. So those values are fairly large, fairly coarse, and yet our 8-kilometer resolution is very small, and even more, our Landsat information is 30-meter resolution, it's 1 second resolution. So how do you make compatible something which is very coarse at 54 and to 30-meter resolution? 54 kilometers, 30-meter resolution is a big jump. This is where the science is at. There are papers and publications coming out that allow us to look into the upscaling and downscaling procedures. This is a very common problem, not only in climate change studies, but in watershed science studies. How do you upscale or downscale with the highest accuracy possible, measurements that are done in, say, a liter of water, and then bringing them up to the scale of a watershed or a large water body in order to be able to make some assertions as to what is the status and what are the trends of that parameter. So it's a very common problem, upscaling and downscaling. We use some of those procedures in the results that I will be showing you in a minute. Again, I'm going to go back to my flow diagrams charts. This is just simply to, again, to show off and to tell you that it wasn't random. We thought about the procedures themselves and tried them out. So again, we acquired NDVI values and land-loaded MODIS MPP and make them compatible through production efficiency equation they calculate with about 7 million values for the entire country, and run a regression and calculate the net primary productivity from NDVI and net primary productivity from the MODIS, and then brought them down, downscaled them to 1 kilometer, from L kilometers to 1 kilometer resolution, and then we run from 2003 to 2006 in order to develop a predictive equation as a function of NDVI. These are the two the productivity approach that we use. Again, MPP as a function of NDVI, and these are some of the examples of equations that have been found by other researchers, and in our case we follow that similar approach, and this is our 7 million observations and our coefficient of determination. I know that this could be improved. This is just drawing a straight line. This could be more sort of an exponential growth, but even with that we got a coefficient of determination of 0.82, which is fairly, just with that simple straight line, is fairly good. Maybe the effect of the 8 million and on the sample size that may be interacting and making us a better picture than it really is. So we need to further study this and look at some exponential growth, partition the data and look at all the relationships to make sure that this is a genuine relationship. But trusting on this one, we were able then to compute total net primary productivity for the entire country, and in mean annual percent change, so through the run from 1984 to 2006. So we have literally hundreds of these images, and what I'm presenting to you here is just the result of the differences of the entire run from those 22 years. So you can see then the positive change in green, and the negative change as you get to neutral, and negative change as you go to the oranges and the reds. So that tells you what ecosystems are going through during those, establishes the baseline to 2006, and then you can move forward by running the general circulation model, getting what the parameters in the future are going to be, and then running similar net primary productivity models, and so you can establish what the net primary productivity is going to be like, say in 2050 or 2030, or whatever time horizon you want to study. Oops, I went too happy on this. So in 22 years then, this is the values of normalized different vegetation index, converted then onto total net primary productivity in kilograms of carbon per hectare per year for the 22 years average. So you can see then the green areas of improvement are particularly in areas that are very dry at the moment, close to Somalia. But there is some greening of these drylands, and areas that are typically highlands there is some process of the onset probably of desertification or die out in those areas over the 22-year period. And here is the result of this, although there are few points, as many points as observations that we have, time observations, but you can see here that there is a net decline in the 22-year period overall the country. Some areas are getting better than others, and so degradation are the ones, net degradation are the ones that you find in brown, and here is the calculations of the land area that has been degraded, and the land area that remains with no change, and the land area that remains with improvements. When you this type of pictures therefore give some reason to attempt either raise concern in terms of whether net primary productivity is going to mean less food, less water, and therefore less food security issues, and therefore could give help in establishing priorities. This is essentially the aridity index, and that tells us, is calculated essentially with climatic data, and that tells us that there is indeed a trend towards desertification and increased aridity in many areas, more areas than there is of no change. Or so, on the whole, we can say that for those 22 years, Ethiopia is going through a process of net primary productivity decline, and possibly, sorry, I should have shut this off. Possibly food security issues that may emerge from that decline. In addition to net primary productivity, there are other variables that you can see changes from 84 to 2006, and you see, for instance, light use efficiency, that is how plants and ecosystems are efficiently using light or energy. Rainfall use efficiency, which is productivity over rainfall. I'm going to go a little bit, if I haven't bored you yet, then I haven't achieved my goal, so I'm going to go a little bit faster on this. That's the actual map of land degradation improvement in Ethiopia. Where degradation is in red and improvement is in green for all the parameters combined. And when the issue of doing future climate change scenarios essentially builds up on selecting GCMs, running them, estimate future climate variables, and then estimate the length of the growing period and net primary productivity with them. This is an example of, this is an American model, a GCM, that tells you how deficits of moisture are going to occur in what months and where in the country. This is a half arc degree resolution. With that, then you can do a look at crop water availability, and therefore probably projected length of growing period, and then therefore you will be able to establish whether it's going to be deficient net primary productivity and therefore deficient food security too. The results of this study then gives us reasons to believe that there's a wide range of outcomes to be expected for Ethiopia, and there is, above all, when you use general circulation models, there is a great room of uncertainty. It's difficult to predict the variables within a week as to what the weather is going to be like. Now, projecting this according to emission scenarios to 30, 40, 50 years is even more perilous. So there is a great deal of uncertainty, but at least this gives us a picture as to what we would expect. Now this is for Ontario. You can see great deal of variability here on rainfall for different models, and this is temperatures. But this is for rainfall. And how does that translate? So we have some students doing some research and mapping out corn yields, running our crop growth model and looking at corn yields and from different models. This is the Canadian model, and looking how this means, what this means in terms of productivity, whether corn yields are going to increase or decrease. Good news is that in some areas, such as in the eastern part of the province, corn yields are going to be really good. Productivity is going to increase. The west Western Ontario is going to see some decreases in yields in 2050. Whether you believe the models is a different thing. So this now brought it to the Pittsburgh County to make it more localized, and then we see again similar trends, that there are increases of the green areas which are increasing yields for corn in most of the areas that the green area increases by 2050. That means that this area is going to be benefiting for increased rainfall. And just to conclude, we are in the process of developing this. You can go on to customizing. All of these results can be customized and put on a web page to alert decision makers and policy makers. All you require is just to harness, decide on what GCM are you going to use, and then develop, for instance, you can picture this as being for water quality. effective water quality, water balance models, and water quality parameters relationships, and you can be mapped out online. This is a tool that is already online, a prototype, my caveat, and we're doing this as for Mexico as a pilot study, but we are attempting to do this for other countries. And essentially it's a proof of concept that this type of tools could be developed using climate change variables that are feature of climate, show the feature of climate at a given time period. Finally, and I promise this is the last one, so we have things like rainfall and corn yields, etc. This is not reason why we couldn't put some tool like this for water quality. Oops, I think this is when I was thanking you, and when I'll promise I'll answer some questions. Thank you. Certainly, if there are any questions that you may want, or comments. I'm worried. Either I was so brilliantly exposed, or it was so boring and with lack of communication.
I have a question about what you think about looking at the more local scale. Is there data available for that analysis? Because even Landsat at 30 meters might not be able to look at, a particular wetland, possibly.
That's a good point. We didn't go anything further to resolution less than 30 meters resolution per pixel. There are tools, and I didn't present here any results of that, but we have done some experiments using aerial photography and aerial video, more than photography, aerial video for wetland mapping, bottom types mapping. So there is the experience that it's possible to do that in a given monitoring program. I didn't show any results, and unfortunately the time was a bit short in order to be able to show that. But I could, if you are interested, I could send a link to you with where you can find those results, and even forward to you a PowerPoint which shows you some of our experiences. The answer is yes, it's possible.
Like free data though, that seems like a limitation right now in terms of what's available for local analysis.
That's correct. There is the free data stops at 30-meter resolution.
And it has lines through it. Last time I checked. Landsat?
Yes, which you can correct.
Yeah.
Which you can correct by sending them an email. Say, I need data from this area. And then they send you the resample data, and then you don't have the gaps that they occur. Some of those data, if it comes free, it's not going to be perfect. But lower than or higher resolution than 30 meters, then you go into the 1 meter resolution, the QuickBird or the Iconos satellites, and that 1 meter resolution that costs you. So we haven't made that next jump. Hopefully, I don't know, there'll be an opportunity later by any politician becoming a little bit more illuminated and by Providence, and then say, okay, let's free up 1 meter resolution satellite information, which could be very valuable for very local studies.
We had a presentation in the Coastal series a couple of weeks ago, and it was a lady talking about wetland degradation, and one of the comments was the lack of environmental protection policies, particularly in Ontario, and the irony that in the south, where all of the wetlands are degraded, there's fairly good protection, and in the north, where it isn't, where you have these pristine wetlands, you don't have as good protection. I'm just curious in terms of the work you've been doing in southern Ontario, if you can comment on how this links to that protection issue and the policy. But then moving forward, the crops, and sort of under climate change scenarios, what you might be able to expect in terms of productivity from some of these agricultural crops. What are the policy implications, and what should enlightened politicians or decision makers be perhaps thinking about for the 2030s and 2050s?
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Very, very good questions. I think the first one related to wetland protection. Like you, I was very surprised to see that the policy doesn't go hand in hand with the science in terms of wetland protection. And there is a number of studies that attempt to show that in southern Ontario, wetlands are definitely unprotected and they are under attack, definitely, and our policy is lagging behind. What do we need to do is to strengthen the science, I believe, the science and the communication of that science to our politicians and our policymakers. What is the vehicle? I stand here to be educated as to what would be the most adequate vehicle to transfer that, once we develop the science and the results, to transfer that to policymakers so that they develop effective policies for protection. If we don't do this, these wetlands are going to disappear, and fairly soon. With all likelihood, in the period of over a few years, 10, 20 years, we see a good number of wetlands just disappearing, and those ecosystems that go with them. Now, how climate change is going to reflect on that? In all likelihood, what our calculations of water balances indicate that there's going to be an increase of moisture. It's going to be an extra moisture. We shouldn't worry too much in terms of whether they are going to dry out. On that, having said that, I need to qualify. It depends on what area in Ontario. As I mentioned earlier on, our estimates indicate that in Western Ontario there's going to be a drier condition than in Eastern Ontario. And now, whether that means essentially the water balance is going to affect the volume of water in wetlands, definitely in Western Ontario. In Eastern Ontario may increase, but that doesn't guard us against the chemical attack of pesticides, nutrients, etc., that are again related to other issues of land use and agriculture. And so, on the one hand, these scenarios that I presented essentially provide information that is net plant productivity without the use of chemicals. So we don't know what the picture would be if we put some fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides into the model and be able to run it and see how yields would change. But that gives an indication that at least that in terms of net plant productivity in the eastern part of the province, we shouldn't worry too much about. But again, I worry about the aspects that we left out, which is essentially the chemicals and the nutrients that end up being collected in wetlands, and the effect of that in riparian vegetation and wetland vegetation.
So how do wetlands show up on maps in terms of their net primary productivity? What color are they? For most wetlands, they were on the orangey color, so there was some degree of decline already. Whether that is due to we were not able to establish a causality relationship as what is causing that. We believe, and that I show you with the MODIS image, we believe that it's the thing that comes to mind immediately is cottages and is the impact of urbanization or anthropic impacts. But we don't have evidence to do that. So we need to carry out the next stage, the third stage, which is link that to demographics and be able to find some explanatory variables of that. So the answer is yes, there is some decline in some wetlands, but we don't know what is causing that decline. But in terms of your baseline, they would be the green areas, right?
There would be green areas, and when you project them, then it gradually became into the orangey and yellow.
Okay, coming with experience, do we think remote sensing will solve every problem?
Definitely not. I wish I had the panacea here, and then I would say, okay, vote me for Prime Minister, and I'm going to solve all the problems of Canada. No, definitely. What I try to present is that, if anything, is that remote sensing, there is a vast amount of data that is underutilized, and that those data could be paired up to monitoring programs, more specific monitoring programs, in situ monitoring programs, and then could be linked up in order to be able to try to find that causality. My message here is that we ought to come out from the little wetland or the little site and look at the general, more generic perspective, because the data are there that allow us to do that. Whether we find any relationships, explanatory relationships, remains to be seen. But at least we see that there are some trends towards decline, and we saw in the cases of phosphorus and for one lake, we saw that some relationships that can allow us to predict over the space what are the spatial distribution of that impact on the wetlands.
Okay, originally I did work on the remote sensing for 5 years, and when the remote sensing Landsat came first, 1975 to 1980.
Yes.
Okay, then we used the digital data. See, when you are using only pictures to classification of the land, but we studied first physics. What is happening? Like she asked you, how do you identify the wetlands? Okay, most of the wetlands are low area, because topographically low area. And if we take these winter month pictures, if we take that one, wetlands, we'll see the water, that is groundwater is coming. Okay, most of the time, groundwater with the wetlands will identify as a groundwater discharge area. Okay, if we take the winter months, most of the time, if we take southern Ontario, what happens? Higher elevations are recharge areas, snow is melting, groundwater is slowly melting, top layer is completely, there are no leaves at all, winter months. If we take we have shown most of the time pictures only in summer months. We did not show any picture of winter months. But if you see winter months, snow will show the bright, especially band number 7, band number 6. And the wetlands and everything will show the grayish color. If we show the cluster analysis from 0 to 10 are low energy return, middle is something comes, top is that one, higher return. That way you can identify where is the groundwater discharge area, where is the groundwater recharge area, and in the middle is the transition area. Then you can apply the different temporal variation, different years. Then you will see the floodplain, how that is spreading also. Then you can identify the whole basin, groundwater recharge and discharge. But that is the one, next one, because I work for Environment Canada, I know. We use the remote sensing for Great Lakes waterfall classification also. Because chlorophyll, like a band number 6, and where the plumes are going, how the physics is occurring, that one also. No, you did very good work. I'm saying that we have to understand, she asked you, how to identify the wetlands, First, I'm thinking we have to see the physics also. Why the wetlands are formed, how that is happening, spreading that one.
Well, yes, you're right. Thank you very much for I think you should have written the methodology 30 years ago. So I'm 30 years too late. The set of steps that you mentioned, you are correct. Yes, these images do not show winter time images. It's possible to do that, but then you would need other spectral bands to be able to, not the ones that you use for chlorophyllic reflectance. You need other spectral bands because you have to contend with the albedo that comes from the reflectance from albedo from ice and snow. there is a whole science of physics that goes behind it, and that could be actually addressed. My point here is that it is possible. It is possible, and I only showed, yes, summer images. There's winter images that could be shown. It is possible to do that, and there are procedures that can be done, and that we can leverage that vast amount of temporal data in order to find out what is going on in our ecosystems and how does that relate to water quality and water quantity.
Another thing, you did not show anything thermal band, thermal pictures. And if you show thermal pictures, thermal band will show where the groundwater discharge warmer. See, most of the time groundwater temperature is the average air temperature for any area. Then here in the southern Ontario, if you take the February month, temperature was -10, -15 are there, but groundwater is 2 degrees or 5 degrees temperature there. That will show the warmer patch area. Another thing now I saw in the literature, because originally yesterday I got the paper, cashew nuts identification, crop production by that remote sensing. I had to review that paper, that was hitting cashews from Africa somewhere. That paper came, and that I was surprised. Then thermal mapping is also very useful to compare where the groundwater is coming, because people are ignoring the groundwater discharge, especially.
Yeah, you're right. There is that limitation that remote sensing techniques have. I'm not advocating remote sensing for the sake of advocating them. My message is the same, again, that there is this amount of data that can be leveraged and to find relationships. Remote sensing only looks at the surface. There is, you can only penetrate so deep into the water, and there is the whole issue of what you do with the bottom types that are further down, and that takes all the types of instrumentation to be able to study. Sorry, yes.
I was just wondering what kind of analysis has there been where the pine beetle has kind of spread the invasive species out west, and whether your models in this region account for whether there's a possibility that we could see an invasive species and what kind of effect it might have on that country.
Thank you for that question. This is a very topical question, particularly in Southern Ontario. For all these problems that the Ministry of Natural Resources is implementing in terms of programs for invasive species, I think it is possible to find the spectral signature at the level of a species using satellite imagery. So once you find a little bit of research, you find the spectral signature of a given species, then you would be able to map out that species, and therefore with time slices, being able to see the progress or retrenchment of those species, so you have space-time models that allow you to see what is the advancement or the dynamics of that species. But everything would be predicated on finding out the spectral signature of that particular species. I believe colleagues from some of the ministries are already working. I'm aware of the MNR that they are working on invasive species, and they are using some 1 meter resolution hyperspectral data in order to be able to find that spectral signature for mapping purposes. No, it's fine. Sorry. Yes, you sure.
So I'll let you go back.
I'm not scientific or anything, but
Good.
in reading New Gold, and Maud Barlow and Tony Clark are not scientists at all, but they predicted that there is quite a possibility that the St. Lawrence would hardly be running out to the ocean because of, I guess, high water usage further up the Great Lakes, something like the Yellow River in China and the Colorado River in the States, how the water just goes. It's so valuable, so used up. Is there any, could you comment on that? I mean, it's horrifying possibility.
It is very horrifying possibility, and it speaks to the issue of blue water versus green water. In the whole water balance, this is more evident, say, in Southern California, where the balance is now tilted towards green water. Of the total water that is available for a given ecosystem, when you put it into irrigation for crops, that water gets trapped in green tissue. So that's the green water. Blue water is the one that is not trapped in green tissue yet. In that area where there's lots of irrigation and consumptive use for crops, the balance is now being tilted towards green water, to the fact that the people in those jurisdictions are concerned with, wait a minute, we're putting too much water into producing food, and now there's all the demands for water, for other human needs. So how do we find a convenient balance between food security with irrigation and other uses of water, not only in terms of quantity but also the quality of the water that they are using? And this is a very thank you for mentioning that, because it's a very topical issue, not only in places like the US, but in many dryland areas, for instance, where water is pumped from hundreds of meters from the aquifer and then becomes green water. And following the path as to whether that water comes back again into the hydrological system, it's a very interesting issue to research. I haven't got any data, I'm afraid, on the St. Lawrence, but I can easily believe that if there is water being pumped out from the watershed and being trapped into green water, then in the short term we may be able to, we may be going towards shifting the balance from blue water into green water. Whether that agricultural area would expand remains to be seen, and it's all about land use and land use change too. Thank you for bringing out that topic, which is very, very worrisome and of concern, definitely.
Because my question is so related to the question that recently released, but I want to know, for verification of your results, do you think you need to find some terrestrial data because you want to relate the climate change to the unhealthy of the ecosystem, but because something that taken place in Watershed that there is not in your presentation, do you think you need some more research would be developed, but about some data in the watershed that connected to this model, and we would be able to clearly interpret that red color is related because that thing?
Yes, thank you for your question. This is a very good question. In other words, may I split it into two? One part of the question you asked is there any ground truth to your observations? And the answer, although I didn't present it, the answer is yes, that Ahmed Mohammed went back to Ethiopia and spent 6 months there, riding camels and horses and going to places and checking net primary productivity. So those results are validated. He measured net primary productivity on the ground and took a radiation instrument and measured photosynthetic active radiation. So all of those parameters I presented were calibrated on the ground. So there are observations on the ground that validate that model. This should be done everywhere. The results from Southern Ontario, my students prefer to go and play hockey than going to the field and get valid information. I'm joking, obviously. Now, we haven't validated those predictions from Southern Ontario, and it would be very interesting to engage courageous student to go and get some measurements and get some yield data and attempting to calibrate that model. But you're right, those models are as good as the calibration that goes with it, the field, the ground truthing that goes with it. And for the Ethiopian data, all of those models are being validated and calibrated on the ground. Yes.
I had more of a comment than a question. I love your maps, they're fantastic. I was thinking if I were a farmer in Western Ontario, I would just quit cultivating the wheat and shift to knowledge of crops such as horticulture or fruits and veg, because they're high value and they can get a good price in the market for them. And they would lose out on the wheat, but they could replace them with other crops that might sustain their income stream. So they might not it might not be a problem to these farmers that wheat yield and reduce because they can replace them with something. It's a very good thing.
That, of course, that goes to the issue, it speaks to the issue of adaptation. Adaptation to climate change, how we're going to adapt. And adaptation needs to be looked at from the standpoint of livelihoods. You know, you cannot look at one aspect only, and you're right, you need to look at the livelihood. Yes, they won't be able to produce this, but then in the livelihood system, since everything is interconnected, how they can leverage that predicted condition to come up with a solution that would then allow them to adapt. I told my students when we presented this research, I think I'm going to retire to Eastern Ontario and then buy a farm. There's going to be higher productivity there. So Siobhan, you had a question?
Yes, and it's sort of related to that, but also to the map where you investigated chlorophyll A production and the possible indication that that means there is algal growth in the water. As far as that reflects a link to water quality, is there any way of measuring on a scale as large as that, or sorry, as small as that, to measure nutrient presence, such that you could actually measure nutrients in water to indicate water quality changes, but also in soil to indicate soil quality changes and therefore changes in ecosystem productivity?
Yeah, there are data, and in fact, that study was done by somebody who you probably know, because it was one of your peers. It was an honors thesis, and this student went as far as obtaining those values and went to the actual place, to the lake, and with again with a radiometer and calibrate that model. So we have some degree of reliability as to, you know, there is the whole issue of accuracy of the lab and whether the phosphorus parameters were measured with sufficient degree of accuracy. The fact that we found encouraging is that there was a very good coefficient of determination of 0.83, I think. And therefore we were able to predict phosphorus and then chlorophyll that would tell us something about eutrophication. You can extend that relationship to the entire area. Definitely speaks to the fact that you need ground truthing for all of these models. They are as good as your ground truthing is, and as good as the validation and calibration on the ground. As far as the agricultural, you mentioned something about agriculture?
Yes, just measuring those factors in soils to determine the potentially suitable land uses for those areas.
Yes, there are applications to attempt to relate some of the spectral reflectances to things like organic matter, for instance, or some form nutrient concentration. This is the entire province of a hyperspectral remote sensing, and people out west in Saskatchewan, they have run some experiments attempting to find in what way they can map out nutrient concentrations in the soils. So it's possible. At present it's expensive, particularly because the lack of availability of imagery. But it's part of the research agenda.
Yeah, I think it all speaks to developing more accessible technologies for finding these signatures for various nutrients or species as it may be applicable to the degradation and the exchanges.
So there's an entire province of you know, the field of study of remote sensing, and in which Canada has very good remote sensors that can provide those methodologies.
I think that's it for questions, but I'm sure Raul will be around if you want to come up and chat with him quickly.
Only until midnight.
Only until midnight, all right. Well, that's beyond me. I'm leaving, so you're welcome to keep me company till midnight. I've just got a small token of appreciation. Perhaps it's something that will help you go from phase 1 to phase 2.
Oh, yes.
You can start your water quality sample. It has to be useful for something. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Before I allow you to leave, I won't insist on you staying till midnight, but before I allow you to leave, I just had one comment, which is a plug, which is for the next Another Drop lecture, which is Tuesday, of course, 7 p.m., of course, here, yes, and it's Tuesday, March 6th, and it's Making the Connection, How Water Impacts the Holistic Health of Rural African Communities. And it's Kevin O'Brien, who's an executive director of an NGO in Toronto, Canadian Physicians for Aid and Relief. So So I think it's going to be a really interesting, it's going to be a sort of polar flip, although I think that a lot of the aridity issues, the drought and nutrition issues that you've raised today through Ethiopia and potentially into the future of southern Ontario, we'll have to see about that. Definitely adaptation of crops, I think. But anyway, another great lecture, and if you can be here, we'd love to have you. And just one last comment, because the green water piece came up, and I'm going to throw something back on you. Non-scientific, scientific, whatever you are, there's another term which is called virtual water, which is very similar. It's the water that we use to produce everyday things. And so the pair of jeans that you're wearing took 10,000 litres of water. And that steak that you might be considering Saturday night, 4,000 litres of water. And in fact, there's a very prominent virtual water expert out of the University of London, and he goes vegetarian 1 day a week. And he does that for water conservation purposes. He thinks that it probably does good for his health now, as he's in his sort of, let's not say later years, but you know, mature years. And so I'll just throw that back at you, that this whole blue water flowing versus the virtual water that we're using on a day-to-day basis, but we don't actually get it out of the tap or flush it down the toilet. So I'll just throw that back on you and let you contemplate that. And if you want to take me to task next time on it, then come back on March 6th, and I'll see you then. All right, thank you ever so much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again, Raul.
Thanks, Raul. Thank you.